Welcome to this week's episode of QTV, and we have another fantastic lineup of interviews for you this evening.
We'll be chatting with trans youth activist Milo Milton-Moon, who doesn't identify as either male or female.
We continue our Glimpses into Asia series, visiting Bangkok, that tracks tourists from around the world seeking HIV drugs.
Lawyer Gary Singer reflects on the Tasty Bar raid in the 1990s. He was there and spearheaded a class action against the police.
And our Moments in Time series looks back at the details surrounding the raids on that tasty nightclub.
Hi, I'm Milo. I am non-binary and queer. I use they, them pronouns. I am a uni student at the moment studying sport and exercise science. I also am heavily involved in queer activism. I was born in India. I live in an orphanage in Nagpur. I was taken to the orphanage when I was a baby. I'm not sure exactly what age. And when I was 4.5, I was adopted by my parents now. I also found out on my 18th birthday that I actually don't know how old I am. Wherever I went with my parents, people would always look at me weirdly or question what was our relationship. I've been in situations where I've stood next to my dad and someone said, "Where's your parents?" And it's really hard to deal with sometimes. It's a challenging thing, looking very different to my parents, but I also love them and I wouldn't have it any other way. I feel a big loss of culture, especially now, talking to other people about their cultures, and when people look at me, they obviously see that I'm Indian and they instantly ask me all these questions. What has taken a lot longer to figure out is when people are being racist. When I look at a lot of white people, I think they all look the same. I don't know. I didn't come out until after I left high school. I sort of knew that I was different, but I didn't understand why and how. And I know that a lot of people were like, "Oh, you're probably lesbian." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But I didn't really feel that way. And I started going to -18 with my friends and just loved it the first moment I even walked in there, just feeling so supported and so felt like I'd finally found a place where I belonged and a space that I wasn't different. I attended events at -18 for a few months, and then after that I loved it so much I decided to volunteer for them. I finally understood that I wasn't a lesbian and that wasn't the right term for me, and I always knew that I was different, but I didn't really relate to the label lesbian. But now I couldn't be happier that I know who I am. Some people want to have surgery or hormone replacement therapy, or lots of different things to change their physical appearance. For me personally, I know that I want top surgery, which I have actually booked for later in this year, which I'm very, very excited for. I've had this gender dysphoria almost forever, and this sort of discomfort that's not very nice and very constant. Top surgery for me will alleviate this gender dysphoria. I've been wearing chest binder for almost 2 years. I do sort of have my own techniques of trying to not wear it as much, or I have different sizes, so I wear different ones depending on how I'm feeling, kind of thing. Like, obviously they're constricting, they're very uncomfortable, but at the same time I have to wear a binder. I can barely leave the house anymore without wearing a binder. It's also quite challenging because I study sport and exercise science, so I'm often very active and my job's very active, always very active, trying to navigate that. I probably do a lot of things that I shouldn't in a binder, but it's hard not to. It's important. It's a very important thing as a trans person to be able to give yourself a new name. To talk about my name first, I'll talk about my other name. So my legal name is Muni, and I found out that Muni in the Hindu language, Marathi, actually means little girl. So when I found that out, I thought it was very interesting because it's sort of like I didn't really have a proper name. I was just called little girl. I had a lot of disconnect from the name, being trans. I don't think of Muni as my dead name. Like, I just think of it as I have two names. I was looking at some photos earlier today of me when I was younger, and I just don't have a t-shirt on in all of them, and I just look so happy and can't wait to do that again. At the moment, top surgery is my number one priority, and yeah, very, very soon this summer I'll be able to go topless. I do a lot of push-ups, so I always like working on my arms and doing chin-ups and things like that. I don't know, I pretty much like all of my body except that one thing. I'm not trying to be more masculine or more feminine. I'm just doing what feels comfortable for me.
Coming up next, we take a look at prep tourists in Bangkok.
สวัสดีค่ะกลับมาพบกับดร. มารายากับรายการรักลูกสาวให้ถูกทางมีลูกสาวส่งจดหมายมาหานางมีปัญหาเกี่ยวกับการกินส้มตำ
หนูชอบกินส้มตำมากเคยกินคนเดียวแต่ก็ไม่อร่อยบางทีก็หาเพื่อนมากิน1 คน2 คน3 4 5 6 คนยิ่งกินเยอะๆอะยิ่งแซ่บตำไทยตำผลไม้ตำปูปลาร้าตำมั่วพอมันเผ็ดไปหนูก็ต้องเอาน้ำแข็งมาอมแต่วันหนึ่งหนูดันไปกินส้มตำไม่ใส่ถุง
We have been providing prep services for since we opened in 2015, and we already have 6,000 people on prep with our clinic. So we call it Pulse Clinic because Pulse is a thing that created by the heart and it goes everywhere. And now we have branches in Sukhumvit 13, in Ceylon, in Phuket Island, and we're opening an international branches in Hong Kong and in Malaysia.
ทุกครั้งที่กินส้มตำแล้วไม่สบายใจ
จำไว้ค่ะมาที่นี่ไม่มีใคร judge
HIV infection in Bangkok has been reduced, And also because of our successful PrEP program, and also Red Cross, they have a lot of PrEP programs.
Thailand has for a long time been one of the leaders in addressing HIV prevention. PrEP is a relatively new method we have for preventing HIV. It's a pill, you take one pill a day, and it is very, very effective at preventing HIV. Since 2014, we've had more than 3,000 people access PrEP. There is a need and a demand for PrEP in the region that's not being met locally. I've heard the term PrEP tourist being used. Actually, we don't use that term here because everybody who comes into our clinic is a client of our clinic. We offer them whatever services they need. But actually, we have a large number of people who access services at the Thai Red Cross from other countries. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is because the service is very low cost, very easy to access, so it's available to anybody who comes in. But it's also, I think, a reflection of the fact that many other places of the world have been much slower to offer the same service. We've had people accessing PrEP from 100 different countries in the world. Most of those are coming from the region. So the biggest number, when I look at the data, are coming from, I would say, sort of Greater China. So that would include China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. And I know that in those countries, the PrEP drug is available. But those are more developed countries, different economic status, and the cost of PrEP in those countries is a lot more. So it may be $300 or $400 per month. So for many people in Asia who may just be a 1 or 2 hour flight from Bangkok, maybe less than $100 round trip, they can come to Bangkok and get an HIV test and access PrEP. Which may not be available in their country, or if it is available, it may actually be at a price that's much, much higher than the $100 that it's going to cost them to come to Thailand. In the sort of lesser developed countries like Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Philippines, Indonesia, there either is not PrEP available at all, or it may be available in what they call demonstration project. I know a lot of people come to Bangkok for HIV treatment. Now, every country in the region has HIV treatment available, but because there's so much stigma and discrimination against HIV, maybe from the community, from people's family, from their employer, so oftentimes that leads people to want to access services for HIV that are far away from their home. And the same may be true of PrEP as well. They don't want people to know that they're doing something that puts them at risk for HIV infection, especially if that something may be having gay sex in many countries, which is still illegal.
We're throwing this party to be a 4th anniversary thank you party for our clients and stakeholders, everyone. In the last 4 years, we already have like 40,000 clients from within Thailand and outside of Thailand. So we have a collaboration with Kika, a bar restaurant, and we're throwing the party. There will be a drag show and a game and free flow.
Let her be herself. I don't judge her.
Coming up next is Gary Singer, who spoke on Joy 94.9's Saturday Magazine. Then we'll look back at the Tasty Bar raid.
We were at the Tasty Nightclub on the 7th of August 1994, along with 400, total of 467 patrons.
So you were there dancing?
You were there dancing, having a drink. We'd been out to dinner. We were with a group of 4 other friends. Both Jeffrey and I were there. Then suddenly at about 11 o'clock, the lights came on and there was a lot of noise. No one knew what was happening. There was all these who turned out to be plainclothes policemen, but plainclothes people running around, screaming, barking orders at people, yelling through microphones, put your hands against the wall, stand against the wall, and if you're in the middle of the room, because not everyone could get against the wall,
near a wall,
put your hands on your head. And then we found out that it was a police raid looking for drugs. We didn't understand the process of what was happening, and you were told you couldn't speak, you had to be silent, no one could talk to each other.
And of course, none of you had mobile phones in those days.
No, well, no one had mobile phones. Otherwise,
could you film the police doing this?
Well, exactly. And so we just, we stood there, didn't know what was happening. And then, the rumour mill goes around, people whispering. And if you were talking, you were told to shut up. And we understood that we were going to be all strip searched as we left the premises. And no one would be able to leave the premises unless they were strip searched.
Jeez.
So that was pretty horrific because it took many hours, 5 hours, to strip search 467 patrons. The men were strip searched in the cloakroom, what was the cloakroom, which was basically, it wasn't a very flash club, but an open area to a lot of other people. So you were stripped 6 at a time, 6 boys, 6 men at a time, boys, men at a time, in view of each other and in view of quite a few other patrons. So you had to take off all your clothes, your socks, your underwear, and bend over, and a torch was shone up, your anus. I mean, looking for drugs.
So it's amazingly confronting and
humiliating,
intrusive, and
it was horrific. And the women,
in the 90s, and people go, "Oh my God, that was in the 90s."
1994. And the women were taken into a small office, and they were strip searched 2 at a time. And because the police didn't expect any women to be at this club, they didn't have any women police officers to strip search the ladies, so they had to wait a while to get a couple of police officers in, and then they were strip searched again in the process. So it was a humiliating, insulting, dreadful experience that wouldn't have happened but for it being a gay club. And the interesting, when we left, we were we were shell shocked and really angry. And being a lawyer, I said, this is a nightmare that most of my criminal clients describe, where you've got police brutality and the police attacking a whole group of innocent people. And normally it's only one victim and a large number of police. So there's not enough people to tell the story. And your comment, Bronwyn, about mobile phones, there were no mobile phones. There was only that one photo taken by a photographer who snuck out his camera and took that photo, which went on to The Age the next day. And
I remember the photo.
So that was the only sort of physical
photo taken on the night.
Yes, I remember that.
That's inconceivable today.
Yes,
We've all got a camera on us.
Yeah, that's right.
And that photo, one of those people in that photo was identified, and they suffered a lot of homophobia in their family and their group.
Yeah, so they were outed.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of people outed. And running the case, I mean, I spoke to a lot of people who had been there, and there were a lot of really, there weren't individuals who were strong and self-confident like myself and my friends, but there were individuals who were exposed. There was one person who got hate mail from their mother afterwards. There was people from a small town. There's one person from a small town in Tasmania, and the whole family was ostracised in Tasmania because their son was outed.
This is 25 years ago. 25 years ago. That's in our lifetime, Bronwyn.
Yeah. So who took responsibility? Was there ever any acknowledgement by the police that it was the wrong call and any apology?
Yes, there was an apology 20 years afterwards.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. 20 years afterwards by Lucinda Nolan, who was the acting commissioner. She, down at the World Trade Center, made an apology to the gay and lesbian community, and in particular all the people who were at the nightclub on that night. And that was a heartfelt apology.
Gary, you've just reflected on your experience in the Tasty Raid itself. Tell us about the court experience and tell us about how the police behaved.
Well, it was very interesting. When we issued the proceedings, we issued for 6 plaintiffs to begin with, and the first writ which got to the court was this wonderful girl, Sally Gordon, who was our test case. And she's become a good friend after the case. And she was an incredibly impressive witness. But what was so astounding about this case was the way the police fought it. We had 41 police officers come into court and basically lie and said everyone was happy, it was wonderful experience for everyone. We had
having a torch shone up your ass is not a happy experience. No. I'm sorry.
Exactly. But it's the classic police trying to, box everyone into a corner and not tell the truth. We had
and make people frightened because they are the ones in authority. They've got all the power. You haven't got any power.
Correct. Well, we had 467 witnesses, and we didn't have to call them all, but we called quite a smattering of witnesses, and the judge, delivered a very astute judgment. And because, politically, because the amount that was awarded was probably less than we would have expected, because the judge was thinking, there are 467 plaintiffs out there. This is going to cost the Victorian government and the police force a hell of a lot of money, which it did. And that,
I bet they spent more on lawyers, though.
They would have. They spent a lot on, they lost the case, they had to pay us, but they would have spent a fortune on lawyers, a fortune on court time. It would have been better if they'd come in and said, look, we've done the wrong thing.
Okay, we stuffed up, yeah.
We stuffed up.
Let's settle.
At 2:10 a.m. on Sunday the 7th of August 1994, 40-something police burst into the Tasty nightclub in Flinders Street in Melbourne. With much shouting and pushing and frog-marching people, they forced the 463 patrons up against the wall. The police were searching for drugs, as if there might be such a thing at a queer nightclub in Melbourne in the 90s. They were determined to find them, and they started strip searching the 463 patrons. Men, women, trans people. And despite the strict rules about how strip searching should be done, there were only 2 women police officers and no trans officers at all. At the end of the night, they had 6 arrests. But there were reports that the floors were scattered with deal bags and that a quick-thinking DJ had turned on the fog machine when the police burst in order to conceal people's emptying their pockets. If the cops felt that they had done a good job, they were soon disabused of this. The gay community, of course, reacted with fury. Humiliating, homophobic, abusive were some of the words that were used. More surprisingly, perhaps, the mainstream media were also extremely critical. And even the Victorian Premier, Jeff Kennett, described it as disturbing, which is about as critical as a Premier is ever going to be of the police. One other unexpected consequence was a legal challenge directed against the police behaviour. This gay and lesbian community was not the cowed, isolated community of the 50s and 60s that the police had got used to dealing with. Rather, it was a confident, well-organised community, full of people who felt that they had a right to be treated decently. The Tasty crowd in particular were well-resourced, articulate, confident, and there were lawyers in the club that night. There followed a test case in the courts. One brave woman stepped forward in order to have her case examined. At the end, the court decided that the police had behaved unreasonably, inflicting pain, suffering, humiliation upon the woman. This was a test case, and the $10,000 that she was awarded in compensation was almost automatically applied to the other 460-odd people in the club that night. The Premier refused to pay, insisting that the police pay for it out of their own budget. All up, it is said that it cost them $6 million. This event marked a turning point in police-gay community relations. It would be 20 years before the police apologised for their behaviour, but almost immediately the gay community was able to come as partners with the police, negotiating with them as near equals in order to reform police attitudes and behaviour.
Do you know, it's phenomenal. I was in the studio when Gary Singh was being interviewed about the Tasty Bar raids, and the articulation of the story was as if it was yesterday. He remembered every detail, so it must have been a very traumatic event, and thankfully things have moved on so much more now.
Absolutely. Well, that's it from us. We hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next week when we celebrate more queer stories. Good night.
Good night.
Let her be herself. I don't judge her.